people know when you're not being who you are.
Yeah.
A lot of new agents will come in and they're taught to learn the script, which is fine to some extent, but at the same time, you have to put your own personal spin on it and be true to who you are.
Have you been thinking about buying your first rental property for some time, or do you already own a bunch of properties? Well, fellow investors, you found the right location to listen and learn from others' successes. Welcome to The Very Real Estate Effect with your host, Axel Mont-Saint-Jean.
Hello, and welcome back to the Very Real Estate Effect podcast, a show dedicated to real estate investing right here in Quebec. And yet today we have a friend from the South. I'd like to welcome Bob Thompson from Virginia, USA. Hi, Bob. Welcome to the show.
Hey, what's going on? Happy to be here. Thank you.
So likewise, I'm happy to be here. You are the anti-real estate agent, and I can't wait for you to get into this and let us know exactly what that means. But before we do, I just want to remind everyone, please send this episode to a friend who could benefit from this conversation. Leave us a rating, send us some comments. I try to respond to everything we get. Now, Bob, first of all, how in the world did you get involved into real estate investing?
Well, actually, like a lot of people, I read some books. This is probably 2003, 2004, and I started buying rental properties. What I discovered very quickly is, number one, I was a terrible landlord because I was way too nice. So I was too nice and too cheap. In other words, too cheap to have somebody else handle the properties, and too nice to where you're getting the sob story on why the rent's not getting paid. And a lot of people assume that because you can buy rental property, you make good money. No, I have good credit. Doesn't mean I make good money. It just means I have good credit and I can own multiple properties. And if you don't make that payment every month, then I'm not going to be able to pay my mortgage. So that's kind of where it started. And I realized very quickly that I enjoyed the hunt, the process of buying real estate and all that entails way more than I ever did owning it. So I eventually, within a couple of years, got my real estate license and transitioned into real estate full time and just kind of moved forward from there and never looked back.
Very nice. And so now do you have a portfolio? You still have a portfolio of your own, or did you get rid of it?
I got rid of the original portfolio. I'm in the process of getting back into it. I had a major health crisis in 2018. Quite honestly, I had 2 heart attacks and a quadruple bypass, and my credit took a nasty blip. When you owe, obviously we're in America, so when you have $600,000 in medical debt, it makes it a little bit harder to buy properties and do what you need to do. I am luckily through all of that, and obviously will be this coming year, we'll be digging back into both doing real estate investment trust and hopefully purchasing some properties on my own, doing some flipping, a little bit of everything. But I honestly, a lot of what I do is the conduit, the middleman, the coaching. I love that aspect of seeing somebody else, get successful, and I take my little monies along the way, and it makes me a happy man.
Yeah. And so you mentioned that you discovered after a while that you really like the chase, you like the hunt. And what is it about the prospecting and the acquisition process that really gets you excited? Because frankly, I relate to this a lot. And so I just want to make sure for listeners, maybe they can identify as well.
I think what it is walking into a house and just going, okay, well, it's I can buy it for this, but I know if I do this, I do that. Or, okay, there's a half bath. Can I turn it into a second full bath? Is there 2 living rooms? So can I make one of the living rooms another bedroom? So now I've gone from a 3-bedroom, 2-bath to a 4-bedroom, 2-bath, and I'm not losing anything, but I'm getting, higher and higher rental income. Is it in a neighborhood that you don't typically see flips, but I've got the inside track because I know enough people, I've been doing this long enough that I seem to specialize in my uncle's cousin's grandmother needs to sell her house. Bob, can you help me with that? That's a beautiful position to be in. So that's the type of stuff that I love, that I can kind of really stick my hands into and go, okay, this is what we're going to do. This is the game plan.
I understand. And in terms of asset class, have you always purchased and done single families or multifamily as well?
I've done some multifamily. Obviously, in my area, you're not going to see as many duplexes and triplexes. They do pop up. I've actually owned them myself. And a lot of times, typically in my area, a duplex or a triplex is going to be an older home to where they're going to be sharing, let's say, the water and things like that. So it can get a little
Mhm.
stickier because not every tenant is in charge of their own destiny when it comes to water, power, and things of that nature.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's for sure. Everything needs to be properly separated. Otherwise, it could create some conflict. So, so you've mentioned that after a while, so then you've started to help and accompany both brokers and investors. And throughout this journey, you must have learned tons because, as you said, like it's fabulous to see the little red light go on in people's head about what real estate investing can do for you. Can you walk us through some of those moments that you've had where all of a sudden it feels like you pulled the light out of people's head?
I would say I'll give you one of my early examples is I've been doing short sales since 2008. So I've worked with a lot of short
What
sales
are
over.
short sales? Just so everybody's on the same page.
Short sales essentially is where the bank sells the house at a loss, but it doesn't go to foreclosure. So the reason that's good for the owner is they don't have to pay anything to get rid of the property. In other words, they're not paying agent commission or anything like that. And the bank actually wins because it doesn't go straight to foreclosure. The third party buyer comes in and purchases it. So I've done that quite a lot. I
Mhm.
would say a good example of what not to do is I had a property very early on in 2010. I had a client that we bought the property. We were going to rehab the property. The washer dryer hookups were in the kitchen, which in the States in the 1960s was quite common.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, his wife decided that she didn't want to do it that way and she wanted to put the washer dryer outside. Literally created a back porch area, an open back porch area, and shoved the washer dryer in the backyard. So that means the homeowner's got to walk onto their deck in the backyard or their back porch and wash. Yeah, that's the look exactly. And I had no
Yeah.
idea this was going on because we had put a
Mhm.
game plan together as to we're going to do this. So she completely moved the washer dryer hookups from one end of the kitchen to outside into the back door, behind the back door, and made a lot of other changes that were completely unnecessary in a neighborhood that quite honestly you weren't going to get those type of numbers. And again, nobody wants to go in their backyard and do the wash.
No. No, that
It's
doesn't
not
make sense.
1940. We're not doing it,
No.
we're not putting it on the line. We're not doing any of that. It's not going to happen. And they didn't have a garage, so putting it in the backyard was even worse than having it in the garage. And the house took forever to sell. They had to continue to drop the price. I eventually quit and or got fired, depending on your point of view. The contract ran out. I was like, look, you guys made this decision. You're on your own. You didn't ask anybody, and this is
Yeah.
what happened. It's a good example of what I like to call if you don't know any better, then don't do it. We all have people that are better than us, and that stands to this day in many categories. I can't turn a wrench on a car, but I can call my father and get an answer, and then I can
Mhm.
go to my trusted,
Garage.
mechanics and things of that nature to do
Yeah.
that work. But I'm not going to do it myself, and I'm smart enough to know that that's my limitation.
Mhm.
And for him and her to just basically decide that they're going to gut the property and do it their way clearly didn't work. And unfortunately you see that from time to time.
And so because this was a flip and it ended
This
up
was a
sitting on the
flip.
market, so
They-
basically they burned through their margin on the holding cost.
yeah, they ended up losing money on the property. By the time they sold it, they had lost about 10 grand where they could have made 30 grand easily if they'd have just followed simple proper procedure, which is
Mhm.
okay, well the house looks like 1975 landed on it. So we update the kitchen, we update the flooring. We can't get rid of the washer and dryer in the kitchen, and every other house in the neighborhood is the exact same way. So the best we can do is maybe put a door over top of the washer dryer area so it's not quite as loud. But you can't just bend properties to your will. It doesn't make good fiscal sense to do that. And
Yeah.
you're still going
And
to make your money.
and it's not about what is it that you want, it's about what your buyer
Yeah.
wants. And so in rehabbing a flip like that, it's not about you, it's about your ideal buyer and what they want and their demographics and so on and so forth. So I guess that's a good example. Thank you for sharing on, you know, an example of people like, I was going to say young investors, and young not necessarily in age but in experience, who didn't really follow the guidance and ended up doing a loss.
Yeah.
Now I'm sure you have some where they've made some good money with it. I like to draw patterns. I like to learn. And so over the years, with the people that you've coached, what is so specific about those who succeed? What criterias and characteristic do they display?
Honestly, they're patient and they listen. And I think a lot of new investors have a tendency that they just want to buy something, even if it doesn't make sense financially. And I've been there, and what happens is the ego kicks in. And when I owned my first rental properties, at one point I had 4 rental properties, and I'm walked around like I was king of the world, which I guess technically I was when all of the rents were getting paid on time. And then when the rents quit getting paid on time and I'm getting the phone calls, you're not king of the world anymore.
Mhm.
So that's where you have to push the ego aside and make sure it's the right property. That's what your best investors, your big boy investors do well. They will walk away from a property if it doesn't make fiscal sense. I don't care if everybody and their grandmother thinks it's a good deal. If they can't get $40,000 profit on a flip, they're not going to touch it. They may only do 4 or 5 deals a year because that's all that they're finding. But what's the point of flipping something for 10 grand? Doesn't make good sense. Not
No.
the time, the trouble, the chance of it failing is so astronomical. The other thing that a lot of newbie investors will do is they will spend more than they need to spend. If you're going to if you're going to buy a $400,000 property and make 30 grand, if you're going to buy a $200,000 property and make 30 grand, buy the $200,000 property. You got more buyers. And if it fails, it's a lot easier to get out from underneath that
Mhm.
to solve your problem than it is to be stuck with a $400,000 property that you now can't sell because you didn't check your numbers properly or you found something that was wrong, whatever the case may be. So that seems to be the biggest dividing line between the haves and the have-nots, we'll call it.
Yeah, and I like that you mentioned like exit strategies. They didn't think enough about what they were going to do if they didn't find a buyer. And obviously, it's much easier with the $200,000 home than the $400,000 home, even if you have to slap a mortgage on it and then put it out on the rental market.
Yeah, it's the
Too
same
many.
with rental property. That was where I made my mistake. First of all, is that I didn't have enough cash sitting in the bank account to, okay, well, Bob, if the guy doesn't pay his rent for 2 months in a row or whatever happens, do you have the money to cover that? And the answer to that is at the time I did not. So
Yeah.
within 3 or 4 months of owning rental property, I got myself in trouble because I wasn't fiscally secure as I should have been when I started. That's on me.
Mhm.
That's my fault. But that's another thing that I think people need to realize is, yes, you have good credit. Yes, you can buy this property, but make sure you've got that nest egg if, God forbid it doesn't get paid because it's coming after you.
Yeah. In terms of security, how many months worth of funds would you suggest people hold at all times?
I would say minimum 6 months without
Yeah.
question.
Okay.
Minimum 6
That's
months. And granted, in the States, this day and age, we don't have nearly as much rental inventory. So typically you can get somebody else in there. The problem is getting them out. Obviously, the tenant laws lean toward the tenant, and there's a reason for that. And sometimes it's justified, sometimes it's not. But I would say minimum of 6 months. And if you've got to wait and you quote unquote miss the proverbial greatest deal of all time, guess what? There'll be another greatest deal of all time. You just got to be patient.
Mhm. No, absolutely. And holding for 6 months worth is important. 3 months, 6 months. It depends on the property, depends on some of the expenses that could occur. Now, before we started recording, you mentioned a great analogy about the gentleman going to the casino. And I'd like to talk about this a little bit because I think I see a lot of people wanting to get into real estate, thinking it's really easy money and they're going to make a fortune in 90 days and so on and so forth. And they forget that it actually takes years, if not decades, to build some of that wealth. So, can you go back on it on those two different images about the gentleman's going into the casino and what happens next?
Yeah, I'll place it this way. When I go to the casino to play poker, that's my game. I love to play. You'll see the 70-year-old that's been playing poker for 50 years. He keeps his mouth shut. He goes, he makes his $300 or $400 a day. He spends a few hours because he's retired and he has a good time. Then you see the young guys in there. They got the sunglasses, they're flipping the chips, they know all the lingo, but they're constantly losing 200 to $300 a day when they're there. So the question becomes, do you want to pretend to be a poker player or do you want to be the old guy that's just making his money every single day? He enjoys himself and lives his life. A lot of people talk about being an investor. They go to the little investor local meeting groups that they have, which every community has them. I know several in my area, and they talk a good game. And they talk about, we're going to do a wraparound mortgage, and we're going to do an assumable, and we're going to do this. You can talk about it all you want. Sooner or later, you've got to be prepared, and you've got to pull the trigger on the right deal. And most of the people that have been super successful at this, you wouldn't recognize them out of a lineup. They're not driving Teslas and Beamers and all of that. My number one investor owns 70 plus rental property, does tons of flips, has made more money than I can even begin to think about. And you wouldn't know it in any way, shape, or form. She drives a used vehicle and does her thing. Number one, she's a female, which is rare in itself. And number two, you would know she's not going to the fancy restaurant in town and acting like she's the queen of the world. But yet I would love to be on her level on many ways because she's been so successful. So it's about finding people that match well with you and listening and paying attention. But sooner or later, you got to pull the trigger. You can't just talk about it.
Yeah. Well, getting into the action is one of the most important things. And sometimes I say, like, I'm not wishing that you make a mistake, but if you do make a mistake and you pull the trigger and you go a bit too fast, at least you will have learned. Like, we all know people who've sat on the sideline and said they've been wanting to invest in real estate for the last 5 years and they haven't done shit. And then guess what? In the last 5 years, how much did the market appreciate?
Yeah.
So at
And
least you got to get started.
And you've got to get started, and better to learn from somebody else's mistakes than to make your own. We don't really learn nearly as much as from a success. We just don't. It just doesn't
No.
work that way. We're not built that way as human beings. So better to listen to somebody else's mistakes and go, okay, I'm going to do it this way, or come to them and go, what could you have done better? And go, okay, I'm going to try it this way and see if that works. Or find somebody that is a successful investor and simply and quite honestly reach out and say, hey, I'm interested. This is what I've got going on. Are you willing to help me? Now, one of two things is going to happen. If they're a jerk and tell you no, at least now you can move on and find somebody else to talk to. But they may go, yeah, I can do that. I'm ready to mentor and coach somebody, and it may cost you a few dollars, but that's knowledge that you're not going to get going to college, and that's always a good thing.
Well, and that's the thing. Like, you either pay with your time, and it takes you 5 years to learn how to do something, or you pay with your money, and within 3 months you learn from an expert and you get good at it, but it took you 3 months. So you pay for it with your money, or you pay for it with your time.
Yeah, either way you're paying for it, one way or the other.
Yeah. Hey, I also wanted to see, like, I've been seeing more and more articles now that mortgage delinquencies are rising in the US. What can you explain a little bit what that means and what kind of opportunities does that create for investors like you?
Well, what that's going to actually create is you're starting to see the rise of foreclosures again. In the States, obviously, when COVID kicked in, we put in place a bunch of programs to stop foreclosures. Now, what that ended up doing, a lot of folks were able to catch themselves back up with the different government programs. And even folks that eventually sold their property, they had made enough money to catch themselves back up in that respects. So now you're starting to see the normal ebb and flow again, and foreclosures will slowly start to build. What happens with that is you're going to see more inventory because of the foreclosures, and it is an excellent opportunity for an investor to get in on a property and flip it and, of course, make their money or rent it out depending on how bad the property is beat up. So it's a slow process because let's be honest, COVID shut all of that down. I myself always did a ton of REO, bank-owned property, and did a ton of short sale work as a real estate agent.
Mm-hmm.
But it literally by 2019, it was gone, frozen, done. Now you're starting to see that come back again, and it will be an excellent opportunity for investors to get in and buy these properties a lot cheaper, flip them, put them back on the market, which gives an opportunity for a new young family to move in.
Now, it's not as common because in Canada, I mean, it's 1 in like 200 or more that goes for property to be bank owned. Like, there's just virtually no mortgage delinquency. Can you just explain to us, in the US, how do people go about finding and sourcing these deals?
Well, realistically, technically, there's the old school thought process that you can go to the banks themselves and buy the properties. Doesn't happen. It's never
Yeah.
happened. Ain't going to happen. It's a big myth. And I read about it every now and again. And I've even had agents call me, and I've had investors call me and say that it's not going to work. When the bank owns a property, they're going to put it out there to the highest bidder, either on the MLS, they're going to auction it, things of that nature. What the investor can do is stay in touch with an agent that quite honestly has their ear to the ground. Again, I've lived in Hampton Roads, Virginia Beach, Norfolk, Virginia area my entire life. So I've got 20 years worth of experience to where I've gained a reputation as somebody that, okay, if I've got a strange property or I've got a property I need to sell, I can call Bob and he knows all the people to sell it to. So I have about probably 10 to 15 investors that reach out to me monthly. Hey, Bob, you got anything coming? You got anything going on? So that's ultimately what you have to do, is you have to find an agent that is paying attention to these type of things, and also preferably has somebody that, maybe, getting into short sales or doing short sales. And just sometimes it's just blind dumb luck. It's posting on your Facebook channels, hey, anybody got any property coming on the market? Because again, it comes down to either a foreclosure or it could be an estate situation. My cousin's brother's uncle's grandmother passed away. They've owned the house since 1971. It looks like 1971 landed on it. So there's been no upgrades at all.
Yeah. They don't know what to do with it.
We don't know what to do with it. And that's
Can
an
you help
opportunity
us?
for you to jump in. And that's that. You would be amazed how often that happens.
Yeah.
And that's typically where you hear your quote unquote best deal. Like we all know, hell, I know the guy that got this deal and he paid $150 for it and he flipped it for $560,000 and he made $400,000, blah, blah, blah. Yes, it happens, but it's rare. And typically it's just going to be a case of dumb luck more than anything strategic at all.
I love the fact that you mentioned exactly this kind of example, because I find a lot of new investors don't realize that there are opportunities where you being willing to buy the house as is in the condition of the estate sale, you're actually making the family a favor. And they think like, oh, you can't do that. You can't buy it. They're not going to sell it to you at a discount. It's like, yeah, they will, just because within 30 days, you're going to get it off their hands and you're solving a problem for them. And for that problem that you solve, you'll be paid. And you'll be paid is the difference between what you paid and what it's worth. And so sometimes it does pay to build those relationships, because when people need to liquidate quickly, as you said, then they'll think of you and you get the first dibs on some of those opportunities.
Plus, you're buying it as is, where is, which means they don't even have to move the stuff out. It's literally go in, take the family heirlooms and things that you want, leave everything else in the house. We're going to go in and it's going to get gutted anyway. So what difference does it make? There's no reason for you to have to pay to keep the lights on, to pay somebody to cut the grass, to pay somebody to, bring the dumpster and pull out the couch that's 400 years old. There's no reason to do any of that. It's literally cash money, close in 15 days, have a nice day, go on about your life. And most of the time, that's what folks are looking for in those situations. They just are.
Yeah. It just always feels like in the US, it's not that it's a less competitive market, but I mean, here in Quebec, man, property prices are high. And, even when you prospect and you look for properties that are unmaintained, when you talk to the owner, he's like, oh my God, you're the fourth person this week to approach me about this property just because I didn't cut the grass. And so it's a lot more competitive, and sometimes there's less deals, at least in the urban areas. When you get out of town, there's a little bit more, but it's always interesting to see what the different markets are like.
I think part of that is because investors have a tendency to pull from they're fishing from the same lake over and over again instead of changing it up. And I think you and I spoke briefly about it. I have certain neighborhoods in, let's say, Portsmouth, Virginia, that there always are 20 and 30 rehabs, available for sale in that neighborhood. Well, there's a reason for that, because those houses are bought cheap. They can be rehabbed and they can be resold. But if you're competing with 30 other houses, what's the point of even fishing in that neighborhood? I would rather work my way up into a classic blue collar neighborhood, a quality blue collar neighborhood, or even we'll call it a middle class or lower middle class neighborhood. Yes, I'm going to find less, but the chances of me, connecting with that owner are going to be easier and better because there's going to be less people fishing in that spot. And ultimately, that's what I want. It's a whole lot easier. If I'm not the 50th person to ask them about their house and I'm the fifth, and I come across with some sense of normalcy and I'm not a salesman and I'm just going, hey, this is what I can do. I've got investors that can buy this house tomorrow. They can pay you up to this amount. Some of them may even pay a little bit more depending on, the special needs of the property or the needs of the house. So it just depends.
And so, Bob, I guess now that you've shared all this, it makes a little bit more sense. But why is it that you declare yourself the anti-real estate agent?
Because when I got in real estate 20 years ago, I made it a point to tell the truth, whether anybody wanted to hear it or not. That's my attitude and my motto. At the end of the day, tell me I did a good job and pay me. That's all I care about. And even my sphere of influence and most of the people that I work with, they'll even tell their friends and family, hey, Bob's a little rough around the edges, but he's going to tell you what you need to hear. I literally, I take pride in that. I would rather you fire me before you hire me. So if I'm walking into a listing appointment and I get booted out in a minute and a half, that's fine because because let's be honest, you weren't going to hire me anyway because you wanted me to tell you that your house is made of gold and it's not. I do this thing on Fridays on TikTok. I call it the Wu-Tang rant of the week because I'm an old school hip hop fan and I've got my little Wu-Tang shirt and it started as a goof and kind of snowballed from there. And basically what I do is tell the truth, at least my version of the truth. And I think it's important for investors, for buyers and sellers and everybody else to know what's really going on in the market and not come across like, hey, how you doing? You can get a house for no money down and this and that. It doesn't work that way. And it's just not how I operate.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. And I find there's too many bad practices that have made a bad name and a bad rep for brokers. And it really is a disfavor to the profession as a whole. Because given the competitive nature, there's the tendency to want to, as you said, say that the house is made of gold and it's beautiful and it's going to sell for 500,000 when really it should be listed for 300,000 just to get the listing and go from there. So there's a lot of disappointment that inherently gets created, and it's really unnecessary.
No, it really is. And sometimes it's just you can make a simple mistake, but you've got to own the mistake. Case in point, I had a flip property last year that didn't come with a microwave. Now, most of your modern houses have the microwave built in over the stove. This was an older home, and quite honestly, I forgot. And I put in there that it had a microwave. Now, that's in the MLS at that point, and they asked for it in the contract. And then once it was in the contract, I was like, oops, that's my fault. So what did I do? I called my investor and said, guess what? I got to buy you a microwave. Let me know what it's going to cost, and I'll take care of it. Simple as that. It's okay to make mistakes, but it's not okay to own it for it. And if it comes out of my pocket at the end of the day, it comes out of my pocket. That's just the cost of doing business. You can bet I paid attention a lot better on the next one. It happens sometimes.
No, I completely agree with you. Like, we all make mistakes. It's fine. I've certainly made my share of mistakes, but you just got to own it and you got to recognize it. It's okay. You learn either you have a success or you have a great learning experience. You choose.
Yeah. And I posted that on, my TikTok as the Wu-Tang rant, which was, hey, guess what? I screwed up and it's going to cost me a microwave that I'll never get to use and I'll never see because my investor's going to send me the invoice and you can damn sure bet I'm going to pay it and we're going to keep on going. It's the cost of doing business from time to time. It happens.
Hey, as we're getting towards the end here, given your NT real estate agent vibe, how, for brokers that are listening, what would be 2 or 3 pieces of advice that you would give them to maintain their genuineness and not feel and seem salesy, sleazy?
The 2 things that I always remembered is when I first became a real estate agent, I'm arguing with my broker about a price on a house. And I hadn't been in the business less than a year. And he's the team leader. He's the owner. And I'm arguing with him over this price and arguing. And he finally looks me dead in the eye and goes, he goes, why are you arguing with me? It's like, it's my name on the door. It's my team. It's my company. Clearly, I know more than you do. And like the light bulb came on. I was like, oh, good Lord, he's right. So I learned. So sometimes listen to your betters. We all have them in all areas of life. and we have to shut our mouth and listen. And that works across the board. Yes, we can ask other people for their opinion, but at the same time, I'm not a mechanic. I'm not going to argue with my mechanic. It's not going to happen. So understand that. The other thing is, people know when you're not being who you are.
Yeah.
A lot of new agents will come in and they're taught to learn the script, which is fine to some extent, but at the same time, you have to put your own personal spin on it and be true to who you are. Case in point for me, I don't do open houses. I don't believe in them. I think it's ridiculous that in our modern world, what other thing would you ever let strangers walk into your house? It doesn't make any sense. The house is vacant. That's a little different. But you've got to be honest with people. I mean, and they're going to tell the difference. And you're better off losing on the front end and walking away with your integrity and getting the next one, because we're not going to get them all. It's impossible.
No.
There's always going to be people that will fit better with a different real estate agent than me. There's nothing I can do about that. And I'm not everybody's cup of tea. And not everybody wants me to walk in their house and go, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to do it. Sign here and have a nice day. There are people that want their hands held and they want to be walked through very quietly and gently. I'm not that guy, and there's nothing wrong with that. So, we're not going to get them all.
No, exactly. You got to stick to what is it that you believe in. A lot of people
and be yourself. At the end of the day, be yourself 115%, because people are going to see that and they're either going to be drawn to it or they're not. And you're not going to have a good relationship with them anyway if they're not drawn to it. So you might as well just kill it on the front end, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. Bob, I very much appreciate your authenticity and your free, well, I was going to say your free speech, but you know what I mean by that. Thank you very much. If people want to learn more about you, what's the best way to get in touch?
They can reach out to me at bobtheagent.com, and they can also reach out to me at whatbobthinks.com. And yeah, pretty much.
Whatbobthinks.com. I like it.
Whatbobthinks.com. There you go. I'm not shy about my opinions, and I'm not going to pretend I am otherwise. Obviously, you can find me on all the socials at either What Bob Thinks or Bob the Agent. The other thing that I like to think I do well is I answer the phone. I'm big on answering the phone. I know a lot of people don't anymore. I'm old, so yes, I still answer the phone, because let's be honest, if you Google Bob Thompson, you're going to find 8,000,000 of them. So, like I said, bobtheagent.com or What Bob Thinks, either one of those is fine. If you got a question, call me. If I can't talk, then send me a text and I'll follow up with you. I have no problems with that. It's just something I do, and I think it's important.
Perfect. Sounds good, man. Well, thank you very much for your participation today. It's kind of different, and I like the integrity. Thanks a lot, man.
Thanks a lot. I had a blast, and if you need me for anything, I'm always here to help.
All right. And for everybody who's listening, as usual, share this episode with a friend who could benefit from this conversation. Research your market, make some offers. I'll talk to you next week. Thank you.